Okay, we are here with another episode of Perspective on Athletics, and today we have Erin Quinn. And Erin is the Director of Athletics at Middlebury College in Vermont. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us today.
Thanks, Mark. Really happy to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Well, it's great. I know we're going to get at a very important topic and something that is very important to me as I've worked throughout my career. But in order to give people a bit of context, why don't you take us through your career path and let us know how you ended up in the position you are today at Middlebury?
Sure. Well, in some ways, I sort of stumbled into athletics a little bit. And I think career paths nowadays maybe are a little bit less linear than they might have been at one point. Graduated from Middlebury College in 1986. Was not really sure what I wanted to do. I was an economics major and thought maybe I would go into the world of finance. Knew by the time I graduated that was not where I was heading. Was going to go to officers candidate school for the Army just because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do and didn't want to waste my time and thought that would be a really good leadership development opportunity for me. That didn't work out because of some injuries I had in football. So I had to go to maybe plan C at that point and went back and coached football at Middlebury for a fall. Lacrosse coach asked if I wanted to coach lacrosse. I had never played lacrosse. He said he liked how I coached and would teach me the lacrosse side of things. So I coached lacrosse that spring, had the opportunity to coach for 2 years at Tufts University, where I was able to get a master's in teaching. And at the end of that time, was not really sure whether I was going to go and maybe be a teacher coach at the secondary school level or stay in college coaching. Had a job offer to stay at Lake Forest College as their head men's lacrosse coach and assistant football coach. Took that for a year. That sort of set me off on the coaching path. Came back to Middlebury to coach, became the head men's lacrosse coach at Middlebury. Did that for about 15 years, and about halfway through that time period realized that I probably did not want to be a coach for my entire career. Or if I did, would want to expand my horizons by doing some administrative work while I was coaching. Because I was coaching football and was a defensive coordinator in football, it wasn't really a great opportunity to be defense coordinator in football, head men's lacrosse coach, and take on administrative responsibilities. So I never really did have many administrative responsibilities. The athletic director job opened up in Middlebury, and I applied for the job, sort of made my case as somebody who had been interested in athletic administration. And while I didn't have the experience specifically, had tried to approach my coaching career in a way that would translate well into athletic administration. Fortunately, the administration at Middlebury bought my story, and the rest is history. I'm just starting my 9th year as athletic director at Middlebury.
Yeah, and that's a great story. And like you say, stumbling into it is how many people, I think, do, especially at the small college level. But it's interesting listening to your background. You came up through the coaching ranks, which many people do. And you said you didn't have necessarily a lot of direct administrative experience, but I think what was more important is that you've been at Middlebury for some time. You were a student athlete there, and in a lot of ways that probably is more important to the role you're in today than years of administrative experience, because you understood the Middlebury culture, you understood the environment and what it takes to run that place effectively. And that transitions us into, I think, what we're going to talk about today, which is kind of a cultural issue, which is how do you take a highly academic institution like Middlebury, one of the top liberal arts colleges in the country, and also, incidentally, one of the top athletic programs in the country. And how do you compete at high levels in both? And how does that work? And someone in your shoes really does have to understand the culture that that you do have there, and bringing in the right students, etc., the right coaches that buy into that. So what we're talking about today is, I think, an interesting discussion that we had about how you integrate athletics and student athletes into the overall experience at Middlebury, which is one of the best educations probably anywhere. But how do you go about that? What are the important things? So that's what we're talking about here today, is how Middlebury does it, not necessarily on the field, but off the field, which may be more important, in fact. So why don't you start talking about that a little bit?
Great. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I mean, if I backtrack a little bit to my coaching career, when I was coaching, if I were asked to give a coaching clinic, sometimes you get a very specific request. I was a lacrosse coach and a football coach, and maybe somebody wants a clinic on, say, coaching linebackers or in lacrosse. man up offense or man down defense. And I was happy to do those types of clinic talks. But if I was given an open-ended clinic talk, I would always discuss culture. And anytime anyone would ask me, where do you start with your program in lacrosse, X's and O's, whatever, and I would always say, start with culture first. You have to establish the culture of your organization, and really X's and O's, any of those other things are really going to be secondary. And that was one of the things that I talked about in my interview process to be an athletic director, that culture and the culture of the department is incredibly and critically important, and I would work hard to establish that early on and continue to work on that. So this is not something that I came to just recently or as an administrator. It's really what I felt like on a micro level as a coach as well. It's what got me into coaching in the first place, is coming through a really healthy culture at Middlebury, having the integration really of my athletic and academic experience be really a transformative experience for me while at Middlebury as a student. So it set me up well as a coach, and set me up well as an athletic administrator to have that perspective. The sport was really important. Keep in mind, I never played lacrosse, so I did not get into my primary coaching duty because of a love of the sport necessarily, but more of a recognition of how that sport can be a vehicle into really kind of helping the overall educational experience for our student athletes. So that's how my coaching career started, came out of my playing experience, and it's gone naturally into my administrator experience. So yeah, we really focus on culture, and then as you alluded to, the integration of the athletic experience with the overall experience, educational experience at the college. So one of the ways we look at it is to say, what does it mean to be a student at Middlebury College? Not to be a student athlete necessarily at Middlebury College, but what does it mean to be a student at Middlebury College? What are some of the challenges one faces? What are some of the opportunities that one has? And how can we leverage or capitalize on the athletic experience that our students have to help them integrate better into having a better experience on campus, and also even to take a leadership role on campus and take those leadership lessons that we talk about so often on the athletic fields and have those translate into the rest of their lives. I do say sometimes to our student athletes and coaches that given where we are at a small liberal arts college, if the lessons that we learn in athletics, if the leadership lessons, the values lessons that we learn in athletics, if they stay on the athletic field, then we're really wasting everybody's time. That's not what this is all about. We need to translate those into the campus community, into the local community, so that you have that experience, so that when you graduate, you take these with you as well. So this is not about us just winning games or losing games. That's a part of it. That's sort of the object of what we do. But the purpose of what we do, the big why, is a lot bigger than that.
Erin, it sounds great, and I'm sure you're going to get to this, but a lot of people say those sorts of things, right? A lot of people talk about this, how it's so important to the overall educational experience, and I don't know if a lot of people really understand exactly what that means, but it sounds like clearly you and Middlebury are really doing this. So what does that look like for you? How do you go about this? You say this to your coaches, you say this to your student athletes. How does it actually play out?
It's a great question, Mark, and it's really sort of the critical question. And again, I think early in my administrative career, I started talking about sort of intentionality, and that it's sort of the cliches of integration and the lessons and all that, that we have to bring some intention to it, and then say specifically, to get to your point, what are the issues on a college campus that are important, and how can we specifically help our athletes transition some of these lessons from one realm to the other. So we, through our own experience and our own observation, but also talking to deans and the president of the college and faculty, to say, like, what are the major issues, and our students, I should say, the critical constituency here in terms of who we would poll, if you will, to say what are the key issues here. And then we say, like, what are the key issues? And we let everybody know that we're working on this, and say, by the way, we've sort of identified with you what those key issues are. If there are other issues that come up that we miss over time, let us know, and we can see how we can work that into our training. So we do sort of specific training and education and integration on what we think are some of the bigger issues on a college campus. And in no particular order, hazing which can be very team specific. So, but it's not only athletics, it might be other groups on campus, alcohol and drug use and abuse. Sexual assault is certainly a hugely impactful issue that has really kind of exploded, if you will, on college campuses. Sort of on a positive note, addressing all these issues is bystander intervention, a NCAA-wide and also outside of athletics, probably college-wide across the country, a good buzz phrase of how to address a lot of these different issues. We look at academic honesty and how that impacts academic experiences, just the academic experience in general, with faculty affiliate programs that we have. And LGBTQ issues more broadly of inclusion that might include socioeconomic or racial factors, discrimination, harassment. These are all issues that we've discussed with campus partners to say these are really the major issues that face students and also faculty and staff on campuses. And we sort of look at all of those issues, and I'm sure I'm forgetting one or two also, and say, how could we help develop programming to make an impact in those areas? I think we have a responsibility at our schools. Middlebury, for example, around 28%, maybe as high as 30% of our student body are varsity athletes. It's a hugely impactful number. But I look at it more. So there is that responsibility, but the responsibility almost sounds a little bit negative. So it's an opportunity. Again, how can we improve campus life, and how can we improve the experience of our students and all the students on our campus? So I think that's the way we've tried to integrate it, is to say, not just, hey, take these values and lessons and apply them to your whole rest of your life. It's more to say, what's going on in the rest of your life? We know these things are going on. Right. How specifically do these issues or the lessons that you learned in athletics apply to these issues? Yeah. If you allow me just one other quick point, like we've got several community standards that we talk about, and one of them is integrity. So we start initially when we talk about community standards, sometimes called core values in our department, one of them being integrity. It's this idea of integration and being able to take the lessons from the playing field into the classroom and into the community, and then beyond your experience at Middlebury as well.
Yeah, well, I think it's great. It's actually moving beyond talking about things and living those things, and I think that's the key thing that I'm hearing you talk about. Now, how does that play out for students that are first arriving at Middlebury, or when you need to hire a new coach to lead a program? I'm sure you talk about these things, but how does that always play out? I mean, is it well received? Does it take some adjustment? Because, again, I don't know that this is the norm. I think the norm is talking about these things. You're putting things into action. How do student athletes, their parents, and coaches that you may hire respond to this?
Yeah, probably different in different, some of it's individual, obviously, to the person. Yeah. I think parents, when you discuss this with parents, there are not too many parents when you tell them, we're going to help guide your student athlete. We care about your child more than just as a student athlete, and here's how that's going to play out. And to be able to talk to them in a really specific way where it isn't just sort of the general platitudes, I think they find a lot of comfort in that. I know I'm the parent of a college student and a rising college student, and these are issues that are of concern to me as a parent. So I think the parents are an easy constituency. Our coaches have been really receptive, and I think they recognize, anyone who has enough coaching experience has been around, that they recognize if you chose, say, at the extreme to ignore these issues, that you will only be able to ignore them for as long as they don't sort of pop up, and when they do, to the degree that you are not addressing these proactively, to the degree that you're not educated on these issues, it can be disastrous for a program, for an individual coach or individual student athletes. So our coaches, I think, have really found a lot of solace in us providing them also the education. Coaches, I think coaches at our level go into coaching mostly for what you might say for the quote unquote sort of right reasons, if you will. That's why they choose this level. Again, they sort of do it very intentionally. That doesn't mean, though, that they're an expert on all student life issues. We're really sort of asking them to be a coach, an expert in their subject area, say whether that's football or volleyball or tennis, and then also a dean. So there are people on our campus called deans who their entire life is dealing with these issues that we're dealing with. And we tell our coaches, you don't have to be an expert in these areas. We're going to help provide you a framework to how to deal with these issues, help provide you a framework to educate your student athletes, also to educate you. And then on whatever the particular issue is you're dealing with, feel free, if you're uncomfortable, to just be transparent and to say to your students, I'm not an expert in this area, but I know it's important to your life at Middlebury, and we're going to have a conversation about it. And you probably can educate me as much as I can you. I'm going to do my best, but I'm not claiming to be an expert. I think sometimes for coaches and adults in general to show vulnerability can really help their relationships with the players. I think when you try to go in and try to be in charge all the time and be an expert, if you're not, it comes off as insincere and maybe that you're checking a box, right, as opposed to saying, I know this is really important to your life as a college student, so we're going to address it. I'm not an expert. We're going to do our best. If I get through this and you have questions and I'm not the best resource, we can go to somebody else who's a resource. Yeah. And I think students have by and large responded really well. And we're trying to take this all a bit further and give students even more opportunities to be involved in a way that really can help develop their leadership skills. It can also help if a student has a particular passion for particular issues. We'll say, students, we need volunteers for all of these different issues, rather than having it be so much top down, having some peer-to-peer, developing the peer-to-peer education is important for us. And we haven't done as much with that. We think we can do more.
Yeah, can you speak to that a little bit more? Because I know you've mentioned some things to me already about some of the programs, opportunities where student athletes really can gain some valuable leadership experience on some very real issues.
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. Last year, we realized that it had been a couple of years and we didn't have a systemic way to do programming around LGBTQ issues. And we had done a great panel several years ago, out athletes and a coach, did a great panel. We had good turnout. It was a great discussion, but we didn't have anything systemic. So we produced the You Can Play video in consultation with some students because that creates a sustainable medium, because it gets posted on the website. It's there in perpetuity until we decide maybe it's outdated and we need to do a new one, or there's another medium that might be more effective. That prompted some discussions with students where some students working with me, but really students taking the lead, brought Wade Davis, an former NFL player who's the executive director of You Can Play, prompted the students to raise all of the money to bring Wade Davis to campus, which then prompted lots of discussions, which then led to students coming to me, and by students, primarily student athletes, in consultation with some campus partners who are not athletes, to organize roundtable discussions. And really all they asked for me was permission, and I obviously granted it very quickly. And then they asked for how I might help promote it. And I said, well, you should do the promotion, but send it to me and I'll get it to the coaches who will get it to the students, but then work through Student Athlete Advisory Committee and your other student mediums to get students there. So they had every single team represented, had over 100 students. They had a panel where one student sort of introduced the panel. Each panelist made a few comments, and then they developed questions that they wanted each student table to discuss. Somebody would report out to the group, then they would go on to the next topic, and just a really great example. And that was in some ways the model of maybe we should have little mini committees like that for any number of different issues. Maybe not for every single issue. Maybe some issues we can just do a one-time training and that's enough. Maybe other issues, or there's ongoing work to do, and having a standing committee of students, maybe with a coach liaison, similar to what we do with the Student Athlete Advisory Committee. Right. Maybe the SAC model works for other major issues as well. So we're kind of moving in that direction on several of the issues, and the students really showed us the way on that.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, real practical experience for student athletes to take the lead on some very serious social issues. It also seems to me that it's important that not only you as the director of athletics, but your supervisor and the president and everybody on up, there needs to be alignment on these are important issues. I'm curious how that works with kind of the leadership structure of the college, and then how it was received, or how athletics has been involved or changed its involvement. It sounds like you've really upped the game a little bit for athletics to reach out and be more engaged. And how has that been received?
Well, I think, similar to the parent constituency, when you say, hey, we're going to help create a better experience, safer experience for your son or daughter. I think when you're talking to senior administration at the college, when you say, I've got some ideas on how we can help improve campus culture, whether that's specific to student-athlete campus culture and how student-athletes may impact campus culture, or campus culture more broadly, and we want to work with campus partners to make sure that we have the right issues, to make sure that we're leveraging all of the resources that we have. My sense is there are probably very few senior administrators who would turn down that offer. I think, and in fairness to our senior administrators too, there are issues where they'll come to us and say, we need to do more in this issue. We're not doing enough. We feel like, we need you to sort of step up your game in this way. It's not all, sort of them sitting back waiting for us to come to them. We have a really good, I would call it maybe symbiotic relationship, if you will, between athletics and all levels of our administration. And so that's been helpful, and it's already sort of embedded in our campus culture that I work closely with my supervisor, who's the dean of the college. I work closely with our president and with other administrators on campus. So we have a built-in advantage in that sense of already having a good relationship. But I think they're thrilled that we're, really not looking at athletics in a silo at all, that they don't have to convince us at all, that we're fully on board. It works to everybody's advantage. So, when you're sort of then want to focus on something that may be a little bit more specifically athletic related, I think people receive that a little bit better too. It's not a sense that you're myopic and only thinking about winning and losing and athletics for the sake of athletics, but in the bigger picture. But part of that is athletics. It's part of competing on the field too. So that's clearly an important part of what we do.
It is. And we're getting to the point where we're going to wrap up this segment in a few minutes. So I want to make sure you have a chance to highlight or feature anything that you want to talk about here. But for a second, I do want to ask you about the winning component. Clearly, Middlebury has highly successful teams, many national championships, a Director's Cup in there, which was a monumental feat. But how does this all play in? I mean, it's easy to talk about winning when you're winning, but you don't seem to talk about winning a lot, like you just said. So how does all this play into what you're trying to accomplish there, but yet you are winning?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think in terms of our philosophy, you will not hear us talk a lot about winning and wins and losses and pressure to win and championships. It's more about, I think maybe a John Wooden type approach, where you're talking about, sort of competing against your own standards. And this is a discussion that we have a lot on our campus with our coaches. One of our coaches, Dave Sayward, our men's soccer coach, a really experienced, excellent coach with a national championship under his belt, but a lot of years and a lot of perspective, even more so under his belt. They take a lot of space under his belt, more than a championship does. But he leads roundtable sort of coffee discussions around various topics. This topic is a topic we have every year. That balance of sort of competitiveness, wins and losses versus process and focusing on the process. So it's not a non-competitive approach we take at all. As a matter of fact, the word competitive and compete will show up in our lexicon for sure, and I make sure that it does, and I would consider myself a competitive person. But it's a matter of what are you competing for and what are you competing against? And it's really competing against our own standards, competing to achieve the highest level that's possible within the context of a lot of external factors that are outside of your control. And that if you are able to do that, and whether that results in a championship or results in a win or results in a loss or results in a subpar performance, you can, sort of rest easily knowing that, you've competed and you've, reached for excellence and aspired to excellence to the highest degree you possibly can. Sort of striving for perfection without knowing that you'll ever be perfect. Giving a championship performance, whether that results in a championship or not, but giving a championship performance to the best of your ability. So I think that sets up students well for a good perspective There are things outside of your control that sometimes impact results.
Right.
But if you focus on your core values, if you focus on the impact broadly speaking, if you focus on the effort that you're given, I think it's going to serve you well in the long term. If you focus on results and you focus on outcomes, one, it can lead to disappointment. Disappointment's okay, but disappointment for the wrong reasons, and I think really falls short in terms of the quote unquote life lessons that one can learn in sports.
Well, it's great. And I think, again, you're a living, breathing example of, not just talking about this philosophical stuff that should make a difference, but you're doing it and you're proving that it's true.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, exactly. Get back to this whole idea of integration is what we're talking about, and you seem to be doing it better than most campuses. You want to be able to compete athletically at a high level. Certainly, students need to excel and succeed academically, and they need to be a positive part of the campus culture. And you seem to be doing that, but how does that all fit together? I mean, it's not an easy puzzle to solve. How does that work?
Yeah, well, we do look at each one of those areas individually first, and really try to strive for excellence in each one of those areas, in athletics, in academics, and for citizenship. And so we look at those areas individually and say, what do we need to do to succeed in athletics? And what do we need to do to aspire to excellence in academics and in citizenship? And then it's a matter of sort of integrating it all together, making sure that it's not lost on the student athletes, that all of the skills that you learn in these different areas don't exist in a vacuum. They don't exist in isolation, that they help support each other, that to be a great athlete, to be a leader on the athletic field, and then not have that translate into the local community or into the college community, to be a great teammate, but not be a great community member, not to be a great member on your hall, a great hall member, a great member of a class, really is missing the point. So we do aspire to excellence. It's important to us that we compete and that we aspire to excellence on the athletic field. It's just making sure that our student athletes understand that that's not in isolation and it's not an end in and of itself.
Got it. No, I think that's a great point, and that's where many people, and I think many students, it's tough for them to make that connection. And it is a great responsibility on the part of an athletic department to help students see, no, if you are committing this amount of energy to excellence, you can do that in other areas as well. And I think that's what you're talking about. I want to transition now. We've been talking about leadership here and there throughout everything that you've been saying. And as you step back and think about college athletics today, there's a lot of things happening. There's good, there's bad. There's a time of transition here probably that is significant. But for small colleges in particular, and for directors of athletics like yourself, what are your thoughts about leadership? What is important for leaders to do and be today, and especially as it relates to leading college athletic programs?
Yeah, well, I give a lot of thought to this. As you may guess from our just recent conversations about culture, a lot of that starts with leadership, whether it's at the level of the athletic director, the president, the dean, or students or your coaches. That leadership's a big part of that. So I give a lot of thought to this. And I have a pretty specific approach. I mean, I taught a class this summer to a group of students who are on campus around leadership. And not that it's that original, but I have a name for how I teach it. I call it inside out leadership. So it starts with self-mastery, it's self-awareness and self-reflection. So I think for an aspiring young leader or somebody who has lots of experience and is evaluating their own leadership, I think an outside-in approach is backwards. Vision and purpose, starting with why is a great phrase and a common phrase. I think that's all important, but to me that's sort of the end point. That's the big organizational stuff. I think to have integrity, coming back to integration and integrity again, to have integrity as a leader, I take an inside-out approach that is trying to be self-aware, looking at myself personally. I keep on my desktop a list of all of the components of emotional intelligence and what makes up emotional intelligence. I think that's a critical aspect of being a leader. You have some control over your IQ. Maybe not a lot. That's a debate for another webcast. But you have a lot of control over your EQ, your emotional quotient, your emotional intelligence. I think just studying those and looking at how I can improve in those areas is a good way to look at an inside-out approach to be self-aware. Self-awareness is one of the attributes of somebody who has emotional intelligence. So being self-aware, looking at yourself, and then getting progressively larger. So now you go to relationships, basically one-on-one relationships. I think as a leader, giving and receiving feedback is sort of a one-on-one relationship component. Empathic listening, some of those things that really help a one-on-one relationship. Again, you can find a lot of those in emotional intelligence, study of emotional intelligence. Then small teams, taking that to your small leadership teams within your organization, whatever it is. So in an athletic department, it's having small organizational teams of, say, all my support staff who don't coach a sport might be one leadership team. Senior coaches or coaches who oversee certain areas might be another leadership team. So progressively getting bigger. And then, and a lot of this has to happen at the same time, and I'll explain that in a minute. Then looking at the big picture, the organizational development. Now, you can't wait. If you're in a position of leadership, you can't wait to get to that big picture. You have to start with that at the same time as you're developing your inside-out approach. And I would also say the inside-out approach in all of these areas, it's always ongoing. I mean, you never sort of stop. You keep learning. You keep developing. But I think it's more of a mindset that you start with and always come back to yourself as the leader, as a member of the team also, but also a leader of a team, taking that inside-out approach, being self-aware, and not jumping right to organizational development and having your personal self be out of alignment with that in any way.
Right. No, I think that's great. And I think if everybody were to stop for a moment and even just consider what you just said, it would make a whole lot of sense and not get people jumping too far down the line. And that makes a lot of sense. So, Erin, I do want to wrap up with one segment that I always ask guests about. And there are literally hundreds of graduate programs in sport management, sport leadership, whatever it may be. And there seems to be thousands of students coming out for very few jobs. So the bottom line is it's very hard to break into collegiate athletics and finding a job and what people perceive to be their dream job. And so I'm sure you've been in this situation where people come to you for advice. And so I'm curious, what would you tell students or anybody looking to break into collegiate athletics? What do you think is important for them to consider and do? And what best advice would you give that person?
Yeah, I have to confess, I'm not sure that there's great advice because of how you framed the question to start with. There are lots of graduate programs. I think for students who are maybe increasingly looking for a purpose in their life, which I think is great, they may be not sort of robotically going into certain tracks. I think the economy in general over the last 5 years or so has really tightened up. So the job market in general is a lot tighter. So I think there are many more students as they look at more of a passion than just sort of a robotic approach. Athletics for a lot of student athletes, athletics or a career in athletics sort of broadly defined is attractive. So I think the pool is bigger than the available opportunities. If you look at a Division III, and every department is structured differently, but say take our department for an example. The full-time people in our department are primarily coaches. We have very little full-time administrative support. If we had an aspiring athletic administrator who was interested in Middlebury College, I'd have to tell them there aren't really many opportunities at Middlebury. We have a sort of operational type full-time position. We had before and are aspiring to create another full-time administrator position that would be a fairly senior position. So there are and that's in a pretty big, pretty successful, resource-rich environment, relatively speaking. That's how we're set up. Coaches do a lot of the administrative work for us, where somebody's a coach of a sport, and then say the director of intramurals. So not to be discouraging off the bat, but I think it is a challenging environment. I think that there's some really good experience at D1 schools where you are going to be more focused in an area and build some depth in an area that may or may not be the area that you're that interested in. So let's say I have a strong interest in event management. I'm looking for jobs, and there's the job open at a great school in compliance. You do have to sort of question, what are my ultimate goals? If your ultimate goal is to be at a Division I school in event management, maybe you really sort of stick with that and try to find a job in that area. If your goal is maybe ultimately to be a Division III athletic administrator, it might make sense to be a little bit broader with what you're willing to take at a Division I school where there are more opportunities, and to say, well, my preference might be event management, but I know if I want to be a D3 administrator, I have to actually be an expert in all those areas. I might have some people that support me in those areas, but ultimately I'm the one responsible. So I'm going to take that compliance job, build some depth in there. And then, it's the proverbial getting your foot in the door. Maybe you're at that school or another school and an event job opens up, you get to know people, and you can slide over into that job. So, I don't want to counsel people to sort of settle for something, but sometimes you do have to just take the job that's there. What I would say is, regardless of if it's your number one choice or your fifth choice of what you would want to do, once you get there, do a great job. I had no experience as an athletic administrator when I was named athletic director at Middlebury. Special case, obviously, because it was at my alma mater where I had been coaching. But I couldn't get any administrative jobs while I was coaching. It just wasn't working out. I was asking for them. It didn't work out. But what I did say is, I'm going to do a great job in my job, and I'll at least be able to sell the ability to do something incredibly well, to really commit to something, to show breadth in what I was doing, to show that I had broad vision and didn't think of the experience athletically as narrow. And I said, now you just have to take a leap of faith that I can apply those lessons that were a little bit applied more narrowly. I can apply them more broadly. So whatever position you do end up getting as a young aspiring athletic administrator, do a great job in it. Really kind of build depth in that area, but keep broad vision though, so that you see what's going on around you as well.
I think that is great advice, and it is difficult to get that first job. But you're right. Your point about the small college environment versus Division I, you need to know everything. So there really is no experience that is not going to be valuable if you want to end up in a small college environment. So,
no question. Yeah. No question.
Well, Erin, this has been terrific, and you touched upon so many things that, like you mentioned, could be entire shows all to themselves. There are so many great things going on in small college athletics, and that's part of the reason I have been doing these interviews. And I really appreciate you taking time, and want to thank you again for joining us. So I hope that at some point you'll be willing to come back again.
I'd be happy to do it. This was a pleasure, Mark, and I really appreciate what you're doing. I think having this opportunity to get information out there to a broad audience that is not always that accessible to all of us is really helpful to the industry. So thanks.
Well, thank you for that. This has been Perspective on Athletics. We've had Erin Quinn, the Director of Athletics at Middlebury College. Until next time.